All right. Thanks everyone for joining. So today we are going to discuss documenting metrics for RCD programs. This is a two-part series. First session, we are going to talk about everybody has some sort of metric that they document and they report that to different stakeholders. So we are first going to talk about what kind of data is compiled, collected and compiled, and how it is compiled. Are there any tools that are being used, and why that particular data set is used or that particular data is collected is the first session. And then second session would be focused on, once you have all that data that you have collected, how that data is used in terms of trying to address efficiency or in terms of trying to make decisions. So that would be the focus of the second session. So for today's session, we have invited a few speakers. The idea of inviting these speakers was we wanted to try to address different scale of these RCD programs. Dave is going to talk about, Dave Hart from NCAR is going to talk at the national lab scale. Jim Wilgenbush from Minnesota is going to talk at a large academic scale. At least that's my understanding or my interpretation. Then PD Kim from USC is going to talk about mid-scale. And then finally, Kirk Khan from RIT is going to talk about relatively smaller scale. So that's the speakers that we have, and it's open discussion. So if you have any questions, I'm hoping the speakers would be open to answering them as we go along. I didn't have any particular order in mind, though I listed out that order of scale, but Dave, PD, Jim, Kirk, whoever wants to go first, can start talking about what kind of data they are collecting.
I'll ask one quick organizational question. Do any of you, I'm assuming you were just going to chat, but if any of you have slides, just let me know and I can make you a presenter. Jim, Dave, okay. I'll work on that.
I think everyone has slides. There's a lot of data that
right.
Probably is not easy to remember.
Okay.
I'm happy to go first.
Okay, you're a co-host, Dave. You should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Is that working? Oops.
Yep.
There it is. All right. So yeah, I let's see, had me like 6 to 8 minutes and a couple of questions to answer. So I'll just try to run through this really quick. It's just a few slides. So first he asked, what RCD data are we collecting in terms of metrics? And so I categorized it in 4 areas that align with the major services that are part of NCAR run. There's basic system and operational metrics. So system availability is a big one, system utilization. For our data center, PUE is a big one. That's power usage or power utilization effectiveness. We also have a lot of data about usage and activity on the systems, fairly standard stuff, users, projects, allocations, usage. The funding awards that we support is a big one for our stakeholder, NSF. The publications that are generated from the research on the systems and general user support activity metrics like tickets and so forth. For our data services, we do have a number of data collections that are curated and hosted here at NCAR. Those are basic user counts, where they come from in terms of their IP origination, the amount of data volume that's requested and downloaded. That's still a major function of these services, is downloading of data, though we are transitioning to more analysis support here on site. And also which data sets are accessed and cited is another thing that they track. We also develop some software products, and we track some basic downloads and external developer contributions when in those cases that we have open development. Now, in terms of how we collect this data, The system and operational data, they're using tools like Grafana, Telegraph, and Timescale DB to collect those kinds of operational metrics. And then the data center, the information comes from their environmental control systems. In usage and activity, the main database system or main software package is the Systems Accounting Manager, or SAM, which is an in-house developed tool. For user support, we have Jira Service Management. We also track training registrations, and we do an annual survey to collect publications, though we also track a DOI associated with our resources to get publications. For data services, it's the basic web monitoring tools, and I think they have some other custom tools for doing monitoring the accesses to the different data sets. And they do have DOIs associated with their data sets to track the use of those. And finally, software, again, most of the data comes out of GitHub, where we've moved our data to, or our development efforts to, and software DOI tracking as well. So NCAR can mint its own DOIs. So we are able to produce DOIs for all our data sets, for our resources, for our software. So that's been a very big thing. In terms of evolution, there wasn't even enough for a full slide, so I kind of put a few bullets here. It's not changed a lot over time. Some of our tools have been swapped out as newer options have become available, but not really any newer new approaches. Software development, as I mentioned, has moved to GitHub from in-house repositories, so that's added a little bit to what we've been able to track. And as I mentioned, DOI minting and tracking has helped increase how we can monitor impacts of our services. I added one more slide here about our actual metric strategy. And my first bullet here is strategy may be too strong a word for what we do. We do collect metrics related to vendor contractual obligations. That's a big one. We collect them to help assess system growth and future needs. We do it to satisfy stakeholder reporting requirements. And the vendor obligation is a 98% HPC system availability. That's kind of one big number that we track and monitor extensively. It turns out it's also difficult and expensive to maintain 98% system availability for the systems at the scale we run. And we're looking at actually lowering this in future procurements due to the cost of actually sustaining 98% availability for these large HPC systems. In terms of reporting requirements, we have system use. We track system use by the different supported communities. We have research and instructional activities that are supported, and we report on the outcomes and impacts of NCAR activities. So in terms of the problems we have here is, like, we generally collect easy data and report standard metrics. I think there's nothing too outlandish here or surprising. And with few exceptions, we don't really have strategic metrics or targets. We are currently beginning that discussion, like what are the real numbers that we want to influence here in terms of strategic metrics. And we need better metrics for more difficult goals, like how do we show that our systems are tailored for Earth system science, which is one of our statements, but how do we actually monitor that and track that? What's the diversity of our user community is something more we're looking into. How do we measure our levels of innovation, which is something else we claim to be? And then what else do we need to support our need for and value of a national center like NCAR? That's always a tricky question of what metrics help support that value that we bring to the national community. Anyway, those were my slides. That's all I had. I don't know if you want me to take questions or if we're going to move on to the next speaker.
Amit, should we do questions at the end or should we do them?
Yeah, I was going to propose that we do questions at the end. If anyone has burning questions, I would let them go, but I think it would be convenient and more useful to have the questions to at the end.
People can also start adding questions in the notes doc. And so if anybody, folks want to go look there, they can too.
All right, so Matt, I think I'm up next. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so I'm gonna give more of the university perspective, and I think just for context, because we were kind of dealing with different scales and so forth, and as we know, I think across the the university systems, we operate very differently within our individual institutions. And so I'll give a little bit of context first so you could sort of maybe see where these metrics come in. And so one of the things that really guides research computing and really guides our goals, and Dave alluded to this as well, that his goals are in some way linked specifically to their goals, is in this sort of notion that there's a missing middle. And this is an NSF slide that has been used time and time again. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And so we're really at research computing at the University of Minnesota trying to fill that missing middle. And you'll see specifically how we do that with the groups that I lead. And so research computing, again, sort of sits in between data generators and repositories and various outcomes. And we do that, through a variety of different methods, by operating large-scale computing, by developing end-to-end workflows, providing and developing research software. We also provide seed funding, which I know is not a usual part of the portfolio of research computing at different universities, but that's a big part of what I do. And then I think a more common exercise is to provide training and outreach opportunities. So all of these things, as you might imagine, have various needs to associate metrics so that we understand whether or not we're hitting our target. How do we divide things up? So what I have here is just a general schematic of the groups that reside in research computing. I think what this belies, though, is that we're really more tightly integrated with various functions, various groups at the university as well. And so we have staff who are actually embedded and paid for by institutes around the university, and the institutes are involved in everything from the developing brain to lab medicine and pathology to agronomy and plant genetics. And so it's a wide set of various areas that we have specific partnership agreements with. So our staff sort of bleed outside of research computing is what this is supposed to characterize. And the numbers around that have been growing. So our partnership program has been successful in the sense that at least people are putting some of their external dollars toward funding our staff who directly support those activities. We've got a long history as well, and I think that's an important context to make, because now we have a data that longitudinally, in some cases, go back to well before people maybe even had a center at their respective institutions. So our institution historically goes back to 1981. Our systems have been part of the top 500 almost every year since the top 500 started. So we do have historical data that is valuable. And just a glimpse of that value is something shown here, where everyone in this group, I'm sure, can imagine, one of the things we're tracking, a very simple metric, is who's using our systems and what department do they come from, or what area of research do they identify with. And as you might expect, that yellow bar, which sort of represents some of the traditional sciences, has not grown as rapidly as the green and blue shaded bars, where we see life sciences, growing largely in the 2007 up to the late 2010s years. And then we also are seeing now a trend where social sciences are growing, as well as our centers and other operations, other activities at the university. So what metrics do we keep? I'm not going to go over all of them because there are a number of them, but I am going to make the point that Dave made, and that is that we keep metrics that are valuable to the goals that we have. And so listed here, goal 1, just to give you a more concrete example, goal 1 is to provide reliable and leading edge computing and storage services to meet the needs of UMN research and scholarly community and to our external partners. And so There's a whole list here. Again, I'm not gonna, this is just to give you a sample of some of what we're doing. And these are tracked on an annual basis. We update this every 2 years, though, from the standpoint of our compact agreement that we have with the university's finance system. And so a couple of other goals I've kept here. These are our 4 annual goals for our FY23 and 24 years. And again, I've cut off a number of the actual metrics underneath each of the goals, but it gives you some sense of what we're doing. And I'm happy to answer any questions when we get into the question session. So in summary, we have just for MSI, just for the computing element of what we're doing, 54 metrics. Metrics are directly related to our goals. If metrics cease to matter, they are eliminated. We don't continue to track them for the sake of keeping data. The way that we do most of this is in Splunk, and we've actually set up Splunk to do most of the capture as well, but that's not true in all cases. A good example is that, you know, Slurm is capturing a lot of the data that we actually then move into Splunk for longer term storage. The last point that I really want to make and emphasize is that anecdotes matter, and I share love letters. If you've been in this community for a while, you know what, you've probably heard this term before, where when you get those letters from your end users that talk about what great service was provided, or how happy they were with a particular thing that was done by members of your staff, retain those, because those can be gold as far as those who are core stakeholders. And so if I get a letter from someone, you know, again, pleased with my services, then I will turn that letter around usually in 2 ways. First to my boss, because it's important that he know not just the bad things that are happening, but also the good things. And also I'll turn it around very quickly to the staff member to whom that letter was aimed. It's not always, they're not always CC'd, and it's important for them to understand and know that they're doing a good job in various ways. And so those anecdotes or love letters are key things that sometimes fall outside of our concept of metrics, but probably shouldn't. And so thanks very much. Happy to answer questions. And that's all I've got here in terms of slides.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to move to the next speaker. PD, do you want to share?
All right. Hello, everybody. I see some familiar faces. It's been a while coming to this meeting. So at USC, we're still new. We're probably much smaller than Minnesota or NCAR. I came here about 4 years ago. We rebuilt everything from the ground up. We, you know, as a research computing program at our university, we do most of HPC resource operations and user education and outreach. And also, we try to be the institutional partner for any research group that uses a computational resource or doing data intensive research. We also try to be a partner for their grant proposal development. So we try to provide all comprehensive user service, and including cyber infrastructure management and everything. So it's a snapshot for our resource. As you can see, we have about 1,500 compute nodes total, about 45,000 cores, and about 20%, 15 to 20% of them are GPU resource. And we have FDR InfiniBand, but soon to be upgraded to NDR InfiniBand. We have 10 petabytes of project file system plus 2.5 scratch file system. And we are adding a brand new hybrid cloud computing platform funded by NSF. So The scale wise, it's not too big, not too small, but still we're catching up a lot of other R1 universities. That's what we have now. As for the data metrics, I have these 3 different categories just to make sure we cover most of data that we want to have. For operational side, we, of course, just like anybody else, we collect data for system uptime, utilization percentage. For storage, we collect the data for data volume and number of files per project, and all the characteristics of jobs, and where what researchers in what department in schools are submitting those jobs. And also per project, we collect more information about number of users, allocation size, and everything. Those data are, and most of data are visible to users as well. And also these data is something we need for our daily operation. For technical metrics, this is mostly for billing, annual billing cycle. So number of nodes, of course, there are a new number of nodes we purchase every year, and there's a number of nodes that we decommission every year. And also we have a separate program for control cluster. So purchasing the node, or we also have subscription model. So if somebody wants to subscribe a few number of compute nodes instead of purchasing it, then it's a different model. So we track those usage separately. And also for storage, we charge a very minimal amount of money for certain space. So we track those usage as well. For long-term strategy point of view, we try to correlate our service with research grants that researchers are bringing into the university. So PIs and amount of awards and funding agencies and the project period, all sort of information for those funding brought by the PIs who's using our system is something really important for us. So we try to collect the information as much as we can. And also we usually try to connect that information with the actual system usage or allocation size or storage usage by those PIs who are bringing those funding. And recently we initiated some data collection for about the research project with sensitive data, because we are building secure computing and data enclaves at USC. So those research project with HIPAA or CUI or default compliances is something that we are collecting to get a better understanding about, how many researchers have those, how many projects, at what research institute, and in what area and stuff like that. So those are the new metrics that we are collecting right now. So that's the end of my slides, but I'd like to share some of those. So we use ColdFront. We use ColdFront as a user onboarding framework, as a user portal, but then at the same time, we use ColdFront to collect all the data we need. So if we go to admin menu and maybe I need to make it bigger. Then, as you can see, we can create any data for system use or data storage use using ColdFront, because we have all this users' information upfront, and because they are using this portal to create their project and request allocation and everything. So if we, for example, user quota with certain allocation, how much they use, those are all tracked, and also storage size per project and how much they're using, that's also being tracked every day. And who has how much of the most data in what projects, those also being tracked. So it's the same data, but it depends how we can visualize it. And also content subscription model and purchase allocation, everything is being tracked. And this one is the grant data. So the PIs, project titles, and how much funding was awarded, and when does it start, when does it end? And now we are trying to connect this data with how much of location they have on our system and how much of system utilization they usually have and how much data they have on our storage. So those kind of information is usually used to visualize how much of contribution we have for those grant money they're bringing in. And that's what we try to present to Office of Research and also CIO office and Provost office so that we can have better justification for, budget planning and stuff. These are some visual dashboard for jobs that are submitted to our systems. This is an example for open science grid system we have, and they provide similar dashboard, but we extract our own data for our own use. So these are available for users, and also the system utilization is always visible to users all the time, every day. Researchers can actually check out their projects and see what's available and manage the users and all that. It's all possible with cold funds. So we are working with the University of Buffalo to add more features and functions. One thing that is missing is probably the building process. And then what else? Yeah, sentence summary. Then we can see that the publication, this is by user input. So we don't extract it from somewhere. The number of publication is actually typed in by users when they log on to the system and when they create the project. We were kind of surprised by the actual input by those faculties and students. And but then I guess the popularity of this portal is getting lower because I can see that the number of publications is getting lower. So I think we need to do one more outreach. Here's a grant overview about what we have on our system. And here is the table for the grant allocation and how many users in each division and stuff like that. So these information is all available to users and to center staff as well. And then we try to, collect the data and then create something that we need to present to the senior leadership of the university to have better understanding and position ourselves for the better funding situation. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirk?
So as an emerging center, I'm looking at how to do this. And so we collected a bunch of annual reports at the last supercomputing conference and sort of looked through and said, what did everybody report on? The number of flops is the sort of most prominent thing. And a lot of the annual reports, it was the actual anecdotes, right? The projects and the story behind the projects was a large thing. Number of users, raw storage, compute nodes, number of GPUs, network speeds, core hours, areas of research, number of projects, RAM, architecture, timelines and history, number of jobs, expenditures, services, and number of publications. In the annual reports, number of publications was much lower, but as you can see in our panel here, it seems to be a high mark towards those things. Mouse, where did you go? Here's, there we go. So some of the ones that we've adopted is publications through a self-reporting. This is a challenge because it's one of those things that there's no real benefit to our people to add these, but we're getting some. One that I heard before and won't take credit for is the number of graduate students and dissertations produced through the service. This is a great tie towards the academic mission of the institution. And we can get that basically of, well, if the person logged on and the person graduated, there's probably a relationship somewhere in there. Number of users, number of projects, number of jobs, number of compute hours, number of GPU hours, average wait time. We do the average of wait time both in CPU and by GPU type. We have some P4s, which are slow and mostly available. But our new hot GPUs, the V100s and A100s, those are always the ones that people are usually sort of waiting on. However, it's when looking at averages, they can get really blown out by people who misconfigured or ask for way too many resources. So we are also including some of the median wait times and median wall times to help sort of see where does things lie of, the okay, the average is way off because we have somebody who's had a job waiting for 10 years, which really skews the average data. But most people within 50% on the bell curve are done in this time. And then we're also looking at storage use. Right now we're using Grafana to capture a lot of things, and luckily my team is very versed in the data gathering. So we're using a tie into the Slurm database and Victoria metrics with some scraping to gather our job stats. And so this is a dashboard I built in Grafana to help give a view of the last 24 hours of, pending jobs, running jobs, so on and so forth. And down here is some of our wait time numbers. And well, if you're waiting for a V100, 5 minutes. Waiting on an A100, 16 hours. And to a previous person's thing, this is sort of that metric of we're trying to keep it in line so that we can say, okay, you don't have to buy your own server. You don't have to wait that long. We've also implemented XDMod, which gives us a nice tool to sort of peel through and give some standard stats that come out of the XDMod user community. And the last one that we have is sort of our, we basically every month go out and check our DOI identifier that we ask our users to include in their citations, and then we can sort of peel that out and gather those up. So it moves up incrementally every so often. So that's sort of a nice thing to see. And that's about it. Oh,
All right,
another,
thanks, Kirk.
well,
Oh,
one piece to
yeah.
add, we're preparing to do an assessment, and one of the things I've been asked is to sort of benchmark some metrics. And one of the parameters I'm using is the higher education research the survey, the HERD survey, to sort of triangulate which institutions are near us with respect to funding in different fields. Because the hard part is to look at the overall. We're way down, we're in the 200s, so it's there. But when we're looking at like engineering, we move up the chart. And so right now I'm using the HERD data to navigate who our peers are and who our aspirational peers are. So.
All right, great. Thanks. So thanks all the speakers for great insights into what data you're collecting. So I had a generic question I wanted to start the discussion off with was, would it be useful, like everybody has their own definition of all the metrics that they come up with, like availability metrics is commonly used, but it has a broad way that it can be defined. So would it be helpful to standardize these as part of a broader effort and put it out there as a white paper to the community? What I guess anyone from the panel, and then maybe from audience want to address? Yeah, Bob.
Sorry.
Oh, Jim, go ahead. Hi.
Just a quick stab at that. I mean, again, that association with the goals is extremely important for us because we inherited a set of metrics that were being kept for the purposes of keeping them, it seemed like. And there was a tremendous amount of work associated with collecting those, and people were just doing it dutifully. It was really impressive, the degree of dedication, but there was no real end use of those metrics. And so we eliminated them. I mean, it just, really has to tie into what it is that you're attempting to do. I just came from a meeting with our health sciences technology group, and they really were clear in terms of strategy, for example, and goal setting, that their goals were to serve the goals of the university. So whatever they did really had to follow the goals of the academic health center first and foremost. And I think, even though I operate institutes, we still operate as a service organization. And so much of our goal setting is how can we better serve the university and some of its broader strategic initiatives and the goals therein. And so it's more about how can we be an organization that is, flexible and, meets the research needs broadly of the university. And so it may be different for other institutions. So that's a long way of saying, I think each institution has to sort of weigh what's important to them. And while it's useful to see other people's metrics, I think that's a discernment process that has to happen at the institution level.
Makes sense. Bob?
Yeah,
Comment on that?
so it's a great great question or great thought on trying to come up with some common ideas around metrics. I want to echo Jim's comments too, because we've been doing a lot of metrics gathering, and once we realized the amount of work it was taking because it wasn't necessarily automated, we kind of pushed the reset button and said, okay, what do we really need to make a difference for us to understand where we're delivering value, and where we might need to spend a little more time working closely with faculty, researchers, et cetera. One of the things that did come to mind though is that it's way back, it's 9 years or so, the ACIRF group actually put out a whole section on metrics. And there was a lot of effort by, I think there was people from, and it was actually beyond the initial ACIRF project, but it went to, I think, ACIRF 2. So it's probably about 20 schools, I think, that were involved in that, in putting together a slice of what metrics one might wish to collect. And I do believe that actually some of the metrics in there was also around, geared particularly towards facilitation, but I think some of it was also involved in some of the standard, how's my cluster doing, how's the RC center doing? Yeah.
Can you share a pointer to that? If you
if you just Google the leading
notes
practices of facilitation. And there might be a couple of people on the calls that were involved in that.
Yeah, if somebody can locate that resource, that would be great to share out.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on it, and it's referenced throughout the whole leading practices as well. So
one of the questions that my boss, the CIO, is asking is actually staffing. There's very little with respect to effort expenditure on the different facets. So I've actually been pondering putting out a survey to sort of ask what is your staffing levels and number of FTEs, kind of thing, of how much time do you spend on facilitation, how much do you spend on sysadmin and things like that, because that's a piece in a strategy and policy kind of thing, that's sort of that unsung thing. We can always tell, hey, we've got bunches of boxes, but one of the things that we're finding is it's actually the human resource to help researchers get jobs done. And it's really hard to extract that kind of information at this point.
All right, thanks everyone. So I think there's a few questions in the chat and then also some comments in the doc. I think we are. Patrick, do we end at?
I want to make one quick comment to Kirk. I believe CASC used to do a survey of how many FTE per course different size centers had. It wasn't a complete staffing thing. I don't know how long it's been since they refreshed that, but that was a nice resource.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. And I don't know if it broke out into the actual facets, because I think that's another piece that is,
No.
in a maturity model, right, is how, yeah, we've got all the sysadmins in the world, but our researchers can't use the tools.
It really just seemed to cover the systems facing and possibly some user support. It was unclear.
Yeah, I think it's time to redo that survey. We've had some internal discussions around that, and this would be extremely valuable data, as you alluded to, Patrick.
I believe Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to add to your comment about standardizing. I totally agree with Jim that you have to make the metrics support your goals. But it was occurring to me, since Patrick's here, about the maturity model. Maybe could have some accompanying metrics to help, bolster the more qualitative assessment that the sites might do, and say, well, here's some numbers you could use to support the qualitative assessment, and there might be some ways to standardize a few metrics along that supports that model. I mean, system availability is a kind of number that might fall in there. I mean, it's a simple number, but it tells you a lot, right? If your systems are down a lot, then there's some issues. Either you're not staffed well enough, your staff aren't trained well enough, you did a poor procurement and you bought some sketchy hardware. But so, there might be a few metrics you could attach to that to say, what are your system facing maturity, that kind of thing. So
we've definitely talked about adding that kind of thing to the institutional profile that's affiliated or that's associated to assessments. One of the things we do want to be careful of is not presuming that a center's focus is purely HPC. And that's the struggle of, okay, which questions do we include, and how do we not prejudice a big HPC center over a center that's focusing on cloud for social scientists or something like that.
Right.
So it's a little bit tricky, but I think it's a great idea, and we're trying to figure that out.
I mean, user satisfaction is another one of my favorite metrics, because it tells you a lot with a different kind of number. And depending on how you collect the information, you can say, well, where can I improve that number? And that wouldn't necessarily be HPC solely, oriented.
Well, and to that, I would love to have some standard questions that have been worked through somebody who's really good at creating surveys, because you could bias or not necessarily intentionally hit the parts. So I think that's one where that would be an interesting artifact of CARC to sort of work on, trying to figure out what are the best questions or some common questions that we could baseline from, of, availability, wait time, things like that, without introducing a bias or missing a point somehow, because I do worry about that. I know enough that I don't know enough about generating those kinds of usability surveys.
And related that, I mean, in doing so, it's always problematic when somebody collects a similar metric that's just different enough from another metric so you can't make useful comparisons. So by saying, oh, this is how we collect user satisfaction, and you can say, oh, this is comparable to how this other site collected it, or system availability even can be collected in a number of different ways. And so, being able to have some even individual metric standardly with a standard definition could be a useful exercise. Say,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna collect it
Budget and
this way.
staffing. Budget and staffing is what I'm always coming back to, because, you know, if you have a highly centralized model, that's one definition. If you have a bunch of institutes that collaborate to support things and provide training, are you counting them? And how do you actually measure what your actual budget and staffing is to support RCD across your institution? It's really tricky.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because each program has different number of staff with somewhat varying expertise. But then when the size of school or university is also different, and then do we know some sort of standard scale for the number of staff for certain size of university or certain size of user community? That's a really important question. We still try to figure it out, but every school has different budget situation, and it's really difficult.
Which isn't to say this wouldn't be a useful discussion. I think what we have to do, to Dave's point, is have an annotated set of metrics to say, okay, what do we think we mean? How do we actually gather them? How are we defining them? And that's part of why we've held off on trying to gather these for an institution, to say, okay, well, how many FTE do you have across each facing? We have to have a whole discussion on how to gather that before we're going to get data that's any good.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we have gone over our scheduled time. So one last comment I had, if anyone wants to volunteer to talk about, once we have collected all this data, what they are doing with that data, how are they presenting it to their stakeholders? If you want to be invited speaker for the next session, then just reach out to me, amit@psc.edu, and I'll be happy to have your contribution in the call. So I hope it was useful discussion for everyone. I think the next call is in a month's time, and it would be the continuation of this discussion going to the next part of this topic.
Melissa and I really want to thank Amit for all of his work putting together this call. I think it was super interesting. Amit, do you want to put your email address into the chat in case anybody does want to reach out to you? That would be great. And I'll reiterate what I put in the chat. There's a bunch of interesting questions in the call doc to the speakers. BD and Jim started annotating some of those questions with their answers. Dave, there's some questions to you in there that if you wanted to drop written answers in, that would be great. Kirk, there's one that I had to you in particular on all those reports that you mentioned. So echoing Amit, thank you everyone for joining us. This was a really, really interesting discussion. As Amit alluded to, we think it'd be great for us to work towards some kind of a white paper on this, even if some of it is the complexity of doing some of this stuff. We think it'd be a great resource to put together for the community. And we're also, so obviously anybody who's interested in this, whether you're a speaker today or other interested people, we'd love to have contributors to that as co-authors on whatever we produce. So if you are interested, please let us know.
How should we let you know, Patrick? This is Moitali from Johns Hopkins.
You can just
send me a note.
Probably the easiest way to email Amit or Melissa or me. We're on the website. We can also drop our emails into the chat. I'll let you do yours, Melissa.
Thank you.
Super. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, all the emails are in the call doc too.
Great. Thank you.
You.